Snow Crash, Chapter 39. The Alcan, the Alaska Highway, is the world's longest franchise ghetto, a one-dimensional city 2,000 miles long and 100 feet wide, and growing at the rate of 100 miles a year, or as quickly as people can drive up to the edge of the wilderness and park their bagos in the next available slot. It's the only way out for people who want to leave America but don't have access to an airplane or a ship. It's all two-lane, paved but not well paved, and choked with mobile homes, family vans, pickup trucks with camperbacks. It starts somewhere in the middle of British Columbia, at the crossroads of Prince George, where a number of tributaries feed in together to make a single northbound highway. South of there, the tributaries split into a delta of feeder roads that crosses the Canadian-American border at a dozen or more places spread out over 500 miles from the fjords of British Columbia to the vast striped wheatlands of central Montana. Then, it ties into the American road system, which serves as the headwaters of the migration. This 500-mile swath of territory is filled with would-be Arctic explorers in great wheeled houses, optimistically northbound, and more than a few rejects who have abandoned their bagos in the North Country and hitched a ride back down south. The lumbering bagos and top-heavy four-wheelers form a moving slalom course for Hero on his black motorcycle. All these beefy Caucasians with guns! Get enough of them together, looking for the America they always believed they'd grow up in, and they glom together like overcooked rice, form integral, starchy little units. With their power tools, portable generators, weapons, four-wheel drive vehicles, and personal computers, they're like beavers hyped up on crystal meth, manic engineers without a blueprint, chewing through the wilderness, building things and abandoning them, altering the flow of mighty rivers and then moving on because the place ain't what it used to be. The byproduct of the lifestyle is polluted rivers, greenhouse effect, spousal abuse, televangelists, and serial killers. But as long as you have that four-wheel drive vehicle and can keep driving north, you can sustain it. Just keep moving just quickly enough to stay one step ahead of your own waste stream. In 20 years, 10 million white people will converge on the North Pole and park their bagos there. The low-grade waste heat of their thermodynamically intense lifestyle will turn the crystalline icescape pliable and treacherous. It will melt a hole through the polar ice cap, and all that metal will sink to the bottom, sucking the biomass down with it. For a fee, you can drive into a snooze and cruise franchise and umbilical your bago. The magic words are, "We have pull-throughs," which means you can enter the franchise, hook up, sleep, unhook, and drive out without ever having to shift your Land Zeppelin into reverse. They used to claim it was a campground, tried to design the franchise with a rustic motif, but the customers kept chopping up those log and plank signs and wooden picnic tables and using them for cooking fires. Nowadays, the signs are electric polycarbonate bubbles, the corporate identity is all round and polished and smooth, in the same way that a urinal is, to prevent stuff from building up in the cracks. Because it's not really camping when you don't have a house to go back to. 16 hours out of California, Hero pulls into a snoozing cruise on the eastern slope of the Cascades in northern Oregon. He's several hundred miles north of where the raft is, and on the wrong side of the mountains. But there's a guy here he wants to interview. There are 3 parking lots, one out of sight down a pitted dirt road marked with falling down signs, one a little bit closer, with scary Harrys hanging around its edges, silvery discs flashing and popping under the full moon as they aim the bottoms of their beer cans at the sky. And one right in front of the town hall, with gun-toting attendants. You have to pay to park in that lot. Hero decides to pay. He leaves his bike pointing outward, puts the BIOS into warm shutdown so he can hot boot it later if he has to, throws some Kong bucks at an attendant. Then he turns his head back and forth like a hunting dog, sniffing the still air, trying to find the glade. There's an area 100 feet away, under the moonlight, where a few people have been adventurous enough to pitch a tent. Usually, these are the ones with the most guns, or the least to lose. Hero goes in that direction, and pretty soon he can see the spreading canopy over the glade. Everyone else calls it the body lot. It is simply an open patch of ground, formerly grass-covered, now covered with successive truckloads of sand that have become mingled with litter, broken glass, and human waste. A canopy is stretched over it to keep out the rain, and big mushroom-shaped hoods stick out of the ground every few feet, exhaling warm air on cold nights. It's pretty cheap to sleep in the glade. It's an innovation that was created by some of the franchises farther south and has been spreading northward along with its clientele. About half a dozen of them are scattered around under the warm air vents, bandaged against the chill in their army blankets. A couple of them have a small fire going, or playing cards by its light. Hero ignores them, starts wandering around through the remainder. "Chuck Wrightson," he says. "Mr. President, are you here?" The second time he says it, a pile of wool off to his left begins to writhe and thrash around. A head comes out of it. Hero turns toward him, holds up his hands to prove he's unarmed. "Who is that?" he says. He's abjectly terrified. "Raven?" "Not Raven," Hero says. "Don't worry. Are you Chuck Wrightson, former president of the temporary Republic of Kenai and Kodiak?" "Yeah. What do you want? I don't have any money." "I just want to talk. I work for CIC, and my job is to gather intelligence." "I need a fucking drink," Chuck Wrightson says. The town hall is a big inflatable building in the middle of the snooze and cruise. It's derelict Las Vegas. Convenience store, video arcade, laundromat, bar, liquor store, flea market, whorehouse. It always seems to be ruled by that small percentage of the human population that's capable of partying until 5 in the morning every single night and that has no other function. Most town halls have a few franchises within franchises. Hero sees a Kelly's Tap, which is about the nicest trough you're likely to find at a snooze and cruise, and leads Chuck Wrightson into it. Chuck is wearing many layers of clothing that used to be different colors. Now, they're the same color as his skin, which is khaki. All the businesses in a town hall, including this bar, look like something you'd see on a prison ship. Everything nailed down, brightly lit up 24 hours a day, all of the personnel sealed up behind thick glass barriers that have gone all yellow and murky. Security at this town hall is provided by the enforcers, so there are a lot of steroid addicts in black armor gel outfits cruising up and down the arcade in 2s and 3s, enthusiastically violating people's human rights. Hero and Chuck grab the closest thing they can find to a corner table. Hero buttonholes a waiter and surreptitiously orders a pitcher of pub special, mixed half and half with non-alcoholic beer. This way, Chuck ought to remain awake a little longer than he would otherwise. It doesn't take much to make him open up. He's like one of these old guys from a disgraced presidential administration, forced out by scandal, who devotes the rest of his life to finding people who will listen to him. "Yeah, I was president of TROC for 2 years, and I still consider myself the president of the government in exile." Hero tries to keep himself from rolling his eyes. Chuck seems to notice. Okay, so that's not much. But TROC was a thriving country for a while. There's a lot of people who'd like to see something like that rise again. I mean, the only thing that forced us out, the only way those maniacs were able to seize power, was just totally, He doesn't seem to have words for it. How could you have expected something like that? How were you forced out? Was there a civil war? Well, there were some uprisings early on, and there were remote parts of Kodiak where we never really had a firm grip on power, but there was never a civil war per se. See, the Americans liked our government. The Americans had all the weapons, the equipment, the infrastructure. The Orthos were just a bunch of hairy guys running around in the woods. Orthos? Yeah, Russian Orthodox. At first, they were a tiny minority. Mostly Indians, Tlingits and Aleuts who'd been converted by the Russians hundreds of years ago. But when things got crazy in Russia, they started to pour across the date line in all kinds of different boats. And they didn't want a constitutional democracy. No way. What did they want? A czar? No, those czar guys, the traditionalists, they stayed in Russia. The Orthos who came to TROC were total rejects. They'd been forced out by the mainline Russian Orthodox Church. Why? Heretic. That's how Russians say heretic. The Orthos who came to TROC were a new sect, all Pentecostals. They were tied in somehow with the Reverend Wayne's pearly gates. We had missionaries from Texas coming up all the goddamn time to meet with them. They were always speaking in tongues. The mainline Russian Orthodox Church thought it was all the work of the devil. So how many of these Pentecostal Russian Orthodox people came over to Troc? Geez, a hell of a lot of them. At least 50,000. How many Americans were in Troc? Close to 100,000? Then how exactly did the Orthos manage to take the place over? Well, one morning we woke up and there was an Airstream parked in the middle of Government Square in New Washington, right in the middle of all the Bagos where we had set up the government. The Orthos had towed it there during the night, then took the wheels off so it couldn't be moved. We figured it was a protest action. We told them to move it out of there. They refused and issued a proclamation in Russian. When we got this damn thing translated, it turned out to be an order for us to pack up and leave and turn over power to the Orthos. Well, this was ridiculous. So we went up to this Airstream to move it out of there, and Gurov's waiting for us with this nasty grin on his face. Gurov? Yeah, one of the refuse who came over the date line from the Soviet Union. Former KGB general turned religious fanatic. He was kind of like the Minister of Defense for the government that the Orthos set up. So Gurov opens the side door of the Airstream and lets us get a load of what's inside. What was inside? Well, mostly it was a bunch of equipment, a portable generator, electrical wiring, a control panel, and so forth. But in the middle of the trailer, there's this big black cone sitting on the floor. About the shape of an ice cream cone, except it's about 5 feet long and it's smooth and black. And I asked, what the hell is that thing? And Gurov says, that thing is a 10 megaton hydrogen bomb we scavenged from a ballistic missile. A city buster. Any more questions? So you capitulated. We couldn't do much else. Do you know how the Orthos came to be in possession of a hydrogen bomb? Chuck writes and clearly knows. He sucks in his deepest breath of the evening, lets it out, shakes his head, staring off over Hero's shoulder. He takes a couple of nice long swigs from his glass of beer. There was a Soviet nuclear missile submarine. The commander was named Ovchinnikov. He was religiously faithful, but he wasn't a fanatic like the Orthos. I mean, if he had been a fanatic, they wouldn't have given him command of a nuclear missile submarine, right? Supposedly. Yeah, you had to be psychologically stable, whatever that means. Anyway, after things fell apart in Russia, he found himself in possession of this very dangerous weapon. He made up his mind that he was going to offload all of the crew and then scuttle it in the Marianas Trench, bury all those weapons forever. But somehow, he was persuaded to use this submarine to help a bunch of the Orthos escape to Alaska. They, and a lot of other refuse, had started flocking to the Bering Coast. And the conditions in some of those refuse camps were pretty desperate. It's not like a lot of food can be grown in that area, These people were dying by the thousands. They just stood on the beaches, starving to death, waiting for a ship to come. So Ovchinnikov let himself be persuaded to use his submarine, which is very large and very fast, to evacuate some of those poor refuse to Troc. But naturally, he was paranoid about the idea of letting a whole bunch of unknown quantities onto his ship. These nuke sub-commanders are real security freaks, for obvious reasons. So they set up a very strict system. All the refuse who were going to get on the ship had to pass through metal detectors, had to be inspected. Then they were under armed guard all the way across to Alaska. Well, the Stern Orthos have this guy named Raven. I'm familiar with him. Well, Raven got onto that nuclear submarine. Oh my God. He got over to the Siberian coast somehow. Probably surfed across in his fucking kayak. Surfed? Yeah, that's how the Aleuts get between islands. Raven's an Aleut? Yeah, an Aleut whale killer. You know what an Aleut is? Yeah, my dad knew one in Japan, Hero says. A bunch of Dad's old prison camp tales are beginning to stir in Hero's memory, working their way up out of deep, deep storage. The Aleuts just paddle out in their kayaks and catch a wave. They can outrun a steamship, No, I didn't know that. Anyway, Raven went to one of those refuse camps and passed himself off as a Siberian tribesman. You can't tell some of these Siberians apart from our Indians. The Orthos apparently had some Confederates in these camps who bumped Raven up to the head of the line so he got to be on the submarine. But you said there was a metal detector. Didn't help. He uses glass knives, chips them out of plate glass. It's the sharpest blade in the universe, you know. No, I didn't know that either. Yeah, the edge is only a single molecule wide. Doctors use them for eye surgery. They can cut your cornea and not leave a scar. There's Indians who make a living doing that, you know, chipping out eye scalpels. Well, you learn something new every day. That kind of a knife would be sharp enough to go through bulletproof fabric, I guess, Hiro says. Chuck writes and shrugs. I lost track of the number of people Raven snuffed who were wearing bulletproof fabric. Hiro says, I thought he must be carrying some kind of high-tech laser knife or something. Think again. Glass knife. He had one on board the submarine. Either smuggled it on board with him, or else found a chunk of glass in the submarine and chipped it out himself. And? Chuck gets his 1,000-yard stare again. Takes another slug of beer. On a sub, you know, there's no place for things to drain to. The survivors claimed that the blood was knee-deep all through the submarine. Raven just killed everyone. Everyone except the Orthos, a skeleton crew, and some other refuse who were able to barricade themselves in little compartments around the ship. The survivors say, Chuck says, taking another swig, that it was quite a night. And he forced them to steer the submarine into the hands of the Orthos? To their anchorage off Kodiak, Chuck says. The Orthos were all ready. They had put together a crew of ex-Navy men, guys who had worked on nuke subs in the past, X-rays they call them. And they came and took the sub over. As for us, we had no idea that any of this had happened, until one of the warheads showed up in our goddamn front yard. Chuck glances up above Hiro's head, noticing someone. Hiro feels a light tap on his shoulder. Excuse me, sir, a man is saying. Pardon me for just a second.